The bone columns rose higher than our lights could reach. Fused vertebrae and femurs stacked into architecture that made no engineering sense. I counted my people again, 8 troopers plus me, and checked the load on my execution pistol. The weapon was sanctified, marked with prayers I no longer remembered how to read. It hung on my hip. We were Black 9, a penal detachment sent into the ruin belt to locate the source of the warp contamination. Penal meant expendable. Detachment meant too small to matter if we didn't come back. The administratum didn't waste full companies on reconnaissance this deep into a fallen world. Yara Kesh knelt beside me, her hands already working. She was our ward keeper, the one who kept consecrated oil flowing and drew the lines that might buy us minutes against the miasma. She had 6 glass ampulles strapped across her chest in a leather bandolier, each one filled with oil blessed by priests I'd never meet. Compass is drifting, 3 degrees in the last minute. I watched the needle swing lazily inside its housing. How long before it's useless? Already is. She pulled a grease stylus from her belt and began marking a stone at her feet with symbols I couldn't read. We navigate by landmarks, or we don't navigate. Ahead of us, Tallow struck his chime once. The sound rang clear and sharp through the ruins. He was mute, birth defect or punishment I'd never asked, but he could make that chime sing. The consecrated metal disrupted the things that lived in the bone gardens. Not enough to kill them, just enough to make them hesitate. The chime's echo came back warped. It bent around the columns and returned from directions that made no spatial sense. "Keep the cadence tight," I said to Tallow. He nodded, his fingers already positioned on the wrist frame that held the instrument. He tapped his thigh twice, his way of saying he understood. I moved through the squad, checking gear and counting ammunition. Trooper Han flexed his right hand and grimaced. I noticed, but didn't stop. Everyone had something: bad knees, old wounds that never healed right, augmetic implants that ground and clicked. We were penal troops. They didn't waste quality hardware on us. "Han, you good?" "Palms numb, Sergeant. Probably slept on it wrong." He opened and closed his fist. The movement looked stiff. "Let me know if it gets worse." I moved on. The ossuary stretched in every direction, a forest of bone pillars that disappeared into darkness above and haze ahead. The air here didn't move naturally. It rolled in slow, cold currents that had nothing to do with wind. When I exhaled, my breath hung too long before dissipating. We walked in a loose column, weapons ready, feet finding purchase on ground that crunched like frost. Calcified dust. This entire ruin belt had been a forge cathedral once, before the warp taint turned it into something else. Now it was just tombs and wreckage, and we were the only living things stupid enough to be inside it. 10 minutes later, Han stumbled. I turned. He'd stopped walking. His right hand was pressed against his chest, fingers curled inward. Even from 3 meters away, I could see the discoloration spreading across his palm, rust blooming beneath the skin. "Sergeant, my hand." I closed the distance fast. The squad stopped, forming a loose perimeter without being told. They knew what corruption looked like. We all did. Han held his palm out. The augmetic interface, a flat metal plate bonded to his flesh where a mining accident had taken 3 fingers years ago, was oxidizing in real time. Brown stains spread from the contact points, and the remaining flesh around it had gone grey. His fingers bent inward like hooks. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "Yes." He met my eyes. He knew what came next. I looked at Yara. "Can you stop it?" She examined his hand without touching it. Her face gave me the answer before she spoke. "Not with oil. This is deep. The augmetic's already compromised. Give it 10 minutes and it'll reach his elbow. 20 and he'll be feral." Feral meant lost. It meant the corruption rewrote you from the inside, turned you into something that looked human but wasn't. Doctrine was clear. Any trooper showing onset got a round through the brain and fire on the body. I touched the prayer beads wrapped around my left wrist and counted 3 before speaking. Han, kneel. He knelt without argument. The rust had climbed to his wrist. I drew my execution pistol. The sanctified barrel caught the light from Tallow's lamp. "Make it clean, Sergeant," Han said. I put the barrel against his temple. My hand didn't shake. I'd trained it not to. I spoke a litany, one my instructor had taught me during penal orientation. The words came automatically. For the line, for the throne, for those who remain. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot cracked through the ossuary. Han fell forward, and I caught him enough to lower him without noise. Yara was already moving, pulling a small tin of Promethean paste from her kit. She spread it over the body methodically, then struck a match. The flames caught fast, blue-white where they touched the corrupted hand. We stood in silence while he burned. Tallow struck the chime twice, his version of a funeral. The sound carried too far. And something answered. A shriek split the air, distant but clear. It came from deeper in the ruins, somewhere past the next line of bone columns. The sound had layers, like multiple voices overlapping into a single scream. I heard it bounce and multiply through the ossuary's geometry. "That's not an echo," Yara said quietly. "No." I reloaded the execution pistol and checked my auto-rifle. "It's tracking us now." The squad tightened formation without being told. Tallow raised his chime, ready to strike. I counted my people, 7 troopers now, plus me, and scanned the darkness ahead. "We move fast," I said. "Stay tight on my mark. Next waypoint is the collapsed nave, 200 meters northeast. We reach it before that thing reaches us, or we fight here in the open." No one argued. I started walking, and they followed. We reached the collapsed nave with 30 seconds to spare. The structure had been a cathedral once. I could tell from the way the broken columns still reached upward, their tops sheared away by whatever had brought this place down. Now it was just a shell, 3 walls standing and a 4th reduced to rubble that formed a natural barricade. Defensible, barely. Yara, ward lines. Tallow, center position. Everyone else, watch the approaches. I dropped behind the rubble and scanned the ossuary we'd just crossed. Movement flashed between the bone columns. Sarah Malk crouched beside me, her rifle braced against a chunk of masonry. She was our scout, the one who could read terrain the way most people read maps. She had ash smeared across her knuckles, some superstition about decisions and currents. I didn't ask. If it kept her sharp, she could read entrails for all I cared. 3 approaches, she said, pointing. East gap, south breach, and they can drop from the nave roof if they climb the exterior. Can you map us an exit while we hold? She pulled out her Auspex, a scanner the size of a prayer book, cracked screen but still functional. Give me 5 minutes, maybe 10. Yara worked fast, drawing lines in the dust with her grease stylus. The symbols formed a rough circle around our position, intersecting at points she'd marked with small stones. When she finished, she pulled an ampulla from her bandolier and carefully dripped oil along each line. The liquid caught the light, almost luminous. 5 ampullae left. Tallow took position in the center of the ward circle, his chime raised. He met my eyes and tapped his thigh once. Ready. Strack climbed onto a broken column that gave him elevation and sight lines on all 3 approaches. He was our long eye, the best shot we had, augmented with stabilizers in his arms and targeting optics grafted into his skull. The hardware made him valuable. It also made him vulnerable. Augmetics failed faster than flesh in warp-tainted zones. He checked his bolt 3 times, even though I'd watched him load it 2 minutes ago. Contact east, he said quietly. I followed his line of sight. Something moved between the columns, low to the ground, quick. Then another, and another. They circled our position, testing the perimeter, never staying visible long enough for a clean shot. Hold fire unless they commit, I said. One of them committed. It came fast through the east gap, a thing made of bone and chitin, moving on 6 legs, man-sized but hunched, its forelimbs ending in hooks. Its head was mostly jaw. Strack fired once. The round took its center mass and it folded, shrieking. The sound was worse than the one we'd heard earlier. Higher, sharper. 2 more answered from the south breach. They moved differently than the first, coordinated, flanking. One went high across the rubble, while the other went low, trying to divide our attention. Tallow struck his chime. The note rang out pure and sudden, and both creatures froze mid-stride. Just for a second. Just long enough. I dropped the low one with a 3-round burst. Trooper Grix, a wiry man with a scar across his jaw, shot the high one before it could recover. It tumbled backward into the rubble. "Good kill," I said. Grix grinned. "Not my first." Then the Vox cut out. Just died mid-static. "Yara, what happened to the Vox?" She checked her handset, then pointed at the cable running from our position toward the rear. It had been severed cleanly, the cut too precise to be accidental. Skulkers, small ones. They go for lines first. Skulkers were the reconnaissance units, smaller than the pack hunters, faster, harder to see. They didn't kill directly. They cut you off, isolated you, and made sure you couldn't call for help or coordinate. Then the larger ones came. "Sarah, how's that exit?" "Working on it." The Auspex screen threw pale light across her face. Something scraped across the roof above us. Loose stone clattered down into the nave. "Roof," Strack said. He tracked movement I couldn't see. 3 of them. No, 4. They came down in a coordinated rush, dropping through gaps in the roof structure. Tallow struck the chime twice in rapid succession, and the cadence made them hesitate, but only for a moment. There were too many. The sound couldn't cover every approach. One landed near Trooper Dunn, a heavy-set man who'd been a loader on a munitions line before they convicted him of something he wouldn't talk about. He got his rifle up, but not fast enough. The creature's hook caught his shoulder and tore down, splitting fabric and flesh. He screamed and went down. I shot it off him. Yara dragged Dunn backward into the ward circle while I covered her. Blood poured from his shoulder, dark and fast. "Dunn, stay down," I said. "You're inside the ward. Don't cross the line." He nodded. They pulled back. All of them. The creatures retreated to the approaches and the roof edges, just outside the ward circle, and watched us. "They know the chime works. They're testing its range," Strack said. He ejected his spent magazine and loaded a fresh one. "Sarah, time. I've got an exit, northeast, through the old manufactory complex. There's a bridge. Looks like it's still standing. If we reach it, we can restore Vox relay and maybe get a signal out." "How far?" 200 meters, but the approach is exposed and the structure's unstable. I'm seeing weight stress on the support columns." I looked at Dunn. He was losing blood despite Yara's field dressing. He wouldn't make a running withdrawal. I looked at Grix. He met my eyes and I saw him understand. "Grix, Dunn. You're going to draw them left. Give us a window to move right toward the northeast exit." Grix's grin disappeared. "How long do we hold?" "Long enough for us to clear the approach. Then you break contact and follow if you can." Dunn started to protest. I cut him off. "This isn't a debate. You're bleeding and slow. You stay with the main group, we all die. You draw them off, most of us make it out. Maybe you do too." Grix pulled Dunn to his feet. "Come on, big man. We've had worse odds." They hadn't, but Grix played it like they had, and Dunn followed his lead. Tallow struck his chime 3 times, his version of acknowledgement, or maybe farewell. "On my mark," I said. "Grix, Dunn, you move first. Draw them west. We break northeast the moment they commit." I counted down from 3. Grix and Dunn ran west, firing as they went, shouting and making noise. The creatures took the bait. They poured after them, across the roof, through the gaps, a coordinated surge toward easier prey. "Move," I said. We ran northeast. I didn't look back. I heard gunfire. I heard Grix's voice. sharp with adrenaline, shouting something that might have been a joke. I heard Dunn's rifle on full automatic, burning through his magazine. Then I heard them scream. We kept running. Sarah led the way, her auspex guiding us through collapsed archways and rubble-choked passages. The screaming stopped. The gunfire stopped. Behind us, the creatures fed. We reached clear ground 100 meters out. Strack climbed onto a broken wall and scanned behind us. When he dropped down, his hands were shaking, just slightly, but I saw it. "You good?" I asked. "Optics are pitting. I'm seeing halos around light sources. It'll get worse." "Can you still shoot?" "For now." Sarah pointed ahead. "The bridge is there. Manufactorum level. We cross it, we can reach the Vox relay on the far side." I looked where she pointed. The bridge was a narrow span connecting two ruined structures across a drop I couldn't see the bottom of. Support cables hung slack. The deck looked intact, but Sarah's warning about weight stress replayed in my head. We cross single file, test every step, and assume we're not alone out there. The bridge was worse up close. The manufactorum it connected had been an industrial structure. Massive conveyor systems and processing machinery now frozen in mid-operation, everything coated in rust and ash. The bridge itself was a maintenance span, never meant for heavy traffic. Metal grating formed the deck, supported by cables strung between towers on either side. Some of the cables had snapped, others sagged under their own weight. Dinar Hook moved ahead of us without being told. He was our lineman, the one who set ropes and secured crossings. He'd been quiet since the ossuary, methodical in a way that made him easy to forget. Now he pulled grapnel and pitons from his pack and examined the bridge structure with professional focus. "Cables are compromised," he said. "We'll need to rig our own safeties. Single file, clipped in. No more than 2 people on the span at once." Bran knelt beside one of the support towers and ran his hands over the stonework. He was our charge tender, an ex-sapper who could read structures the way Sarah read terrain. He pulled a small hammer from his belt and tapped the tower base, listening to the sound. "Foundation's cracked. This whole thing could fold if we put too much lateral stress on it." "Can we cross it?" I asked. "If we're careful, and lucky." I looked across the gap. The far side held the Vox relay station, a small fortified booth built into the manufactorum wall. If we could reach it, we could restore communication and maybe get updated extraction coordinates. Maybe call for support, though I wasn't betting on it. "Dinar, rig the lines. Bran, mark any sections that look ready to fail. Everyone else, watch the approaches. We're exposed here." Dinar worked fast, setting anchor points and running rope across the span. He tested each section by clipping himself in and bouncing his weight against it. When he was satisfied, he waved us forward. "2 at a time," he said. "Clip in, move steady, don't stop." Sarah went first, her rifle slung across her back, hands gripping the rope. Strack followed 20 meters behind. The bridge swayed slightly under their weight, but held. They reached the far side and took up covering positions. Yara and Ratch went next. Halfway across, Yara paused and looked down through the grating. The drop below disappeared into darkness. Machinery groaned somewhere in the depths, probably structural settling. They made it across, 4 down, 3 to go. Tallow clipped in and started across. Bran followed. I stayed at the rear with Dinar, watching the approaches. The manufactorum around us was silent, except for the wind moving through empty conveyors. "Sergeant," Dinar said quietly. He was looking at the cables above us. "Something's moving up there." I followed his gaze. At first I saw nothing. Then, movement along the tower superstructure. Small shapes, maybe half a meter long, jointless and quick. Skulkers. 5 of them. "Tallow, move faster!" He heard the tone in my voice and doubled his pace. The bridge swayed. One of the skulkers descended the cable above him, mandibles working. Bran raised his rifle, but I stopped him. "Don't! You'll hit the cable!" The skulker reached the rope and wrapped itself around it. For a moment I thought it was just reconnaissance. Then it bit down, and I saw the cable fray. Tallow unclipped just as the line parted. He lunged forward, catching the bridge railing with both hands. Bran grabbed his arm and hauled him over. The severed rope whipped past them and disappeared into the darkness below. More skulkers appeared. They came from the machinery, from the tower supports, from gaps I hadn't seen. They moved in coordinated strikes, one at the front anchor point, two more at the rear, another cutting a support cable. "They're taking the bridge down," Dinar said. "Everyone off." I ran. Dinar ran beside me, both of us clipped to a rope that might not hold. Behind us, metal shrieked as a support cable snapped. The bridge deck tilted 15 degrees. We were 10 meters from the far side when the rear anchor gave way. The entire structure lurched, and suddenly we were climbing instead of running. My boots slipped on the grating. I felt Dinar's hand on my back, pushing me up. "Go," he said. Hands reached down from above. Bran and Strack pulling me over the edge. I rolled onto solid ground and turned back for Dinar. He was 5 meters down, hanging from his clip as the bridge continued to collapse. The rope he was anchored to led back to the near side. The side that was falling. 3 other troopers I hadn't tracked closely were clipped to the same line, scrambling upward in panic. Dinar looked at the rope. He looked at them. Then he looked at me. "If I don't cut it, we all go down." "Hold on, we can—" "No, Sergeant, we can't." He pulled a knife from his belt. He checked the knot one final time, and then he cut the rope above his clip. The tension released. The 3 troopers below him screamed as they fell, and Dinar followed them into the darkness without making a sound. I heard impacts, then silence. The bridge groaned once more and then went still, hanging at a 40-degree angle from the far tower. I stood there for 5 seconds, maybe 10, counting the breaths until I could think clearly again. Bran put a hand on my shoulder. "The relay's just ahead." I nodded and started walking. Behind us, something moved through the wreckage below, checking the bodies. The Vox relay station was exactly where Sarah said it would be. A reinforced booth built into the wall, still powered by some emergency cell that hadn't died yet. The equipment inside was military grade, hardened against interference. I activated the main channel and adjusted the frequency. Static. Then a voice. "Black 9, this is Command Authority Hale. Respond." Mother Hale. The zealot overseer assigned to ensure we completed our mission with proper doctrinal zeal. She was technically my superior, though I'd been hoping the Vox would stay dead long enough to avoid her input. "Black 9 responding. We've reached the Manufactorum relay. Multiple casualties. Requesting extraction coordinates and timeline. Negative on extraction, Sergeant. New orders. Proceed to the Forge Cathedral complex and secure any relics of theological significance. Priority Alpha. Proof of heresy or Xenos origin is required before withdrawal authorization." I gripped the handset. "We've lost half the detachment. The warp contamination is accelerating augmetic failure. We need extraction before—" "The mission is not complete, Sergeant. The Emperor's light does not yield to convenience. Proceed to the Forge Cathedral. That is an order." The channel went dead. I stood there staring at the Vox unit. Beside me, Strack checked his rifle bolt 3 times. "So we're going deeper," he said. Sarah unfolded her map, an old schematic of the ruin belt. Half the markings faded. She traced a route with one ash-marked finger. "The Forge Cathedral is here. 200 meters through the transit corridors. We'll be underground most of the way, enclosed spaces." "Good for us or good for them?" Ratch asked. He was the carrion runner, fast and wiry, the kind of man who stayed alive by always knowing which direction to run. "Good for whatever finds us first," Sarah said. "We move in 10 minutes, I said. "Check your ammunition. Yara, how much oil do we have left?" She touched the ampulle on her bandolier. 4, maybe 5 if I'm careful. Not enough. But it never was. I looked back across the gap where the bridge had been. Dinar's rope still hung from the far tower, swaying slightly in the wind. I touched my prayer beads and started counting, but the words wouldn't come. I stopped at 7 and let my hand fall. 10 minutes, I repeated. Then we find Haley's cathedral. The Forge Cathedral's sanctum was larger than I expected, a vaulted space that still held traces of grandeur beneath the decay. Columns rose to support a ceiling lost in shadow. Broken statuary lined the walls, faces worn smooth by time or violence. The floor was stone, cracked but mostly intact, which meant Yara could draw proper ward lines. Mother Hale stood in the center of the space, waiting for us. She was tall, thin in the way that suggested muscle stripped down to essentials. Her uniform was pressed despite the conditions, and she wore a rosette on her chest, the symbol of her authority as a chastener overseer. The pistol on her hip was ornate, reliquary grade, worth more than my entire squad. She held a Vox reliquary in one hand. "Sergeant Jett, you made acceptable time. We lost 3 more on the bridge. Augmetics are failing across the squad. We need to complete reconnaissance and withdraw before nothing." She gestured at the sanctum around us. "This structure contains evidence of the warp taint's origin, relics, documentation, proof that can justify full exterminatus protocols or redirection of resources. That proof is why you're here. We're here to locate the contamination source and report. That's the mission brief. The mission brief has evolved." She smiled slightly. "I've identified the inner sanctum, there." She pointed at a doorway half buried in rubble at the far end of the space. "Pre-heresy construction. If there are relics intact, they'll be there." I looked at the doorway. Then I looked at my squad. Strack's hands were trembling. Not much, but enough that I noticed. Yara had dark circles under her eyes and moved like every step cost her. Tallow stood ready with his chime, but even he looked worn. "We hold here. Draw ward lines, place charges to collapse the approach tunnels, and withdraw. We are not advancing deeper." "That is not your decision, Sergeant. It is when advancing gets us killed." Hale stepped closer. When she spoke, her voice dropped to something almost gentle. "You think I'm being reckless. I understand. But this isn't about survival, son. It's about meaning. If we leave without proof, then Han died for nothing. Grix and Dunn died for nothing. Every life spent here becomes waste unless we give it purpose." The word son made my jaw tighten. I was nobody's son, certainly not hers. "Yara," I said, not taking my eyes off Hale. "Ward lines, full circle. Bran, start placing charges on the main approaches. We hold for 30 minutes, then we collapse the tunnels behind us and withdraw." "Sergeant," Hale began. 30 minutes, I repeated. "Then we leave, with or without your relics." She turned and walked towards the buried doorway. "Then I'll work quickly." Bran pulled his demolition kit and started marking placement points on the columns supporting the tunnel entrances. Yara began drawing ward lines. I checked my execution pistol. 3 rounds left. I needed to requisition more ammunition from the dead, but there were no dead nearby to requisition from. "Strack, you good for Overwatch?" He climbed onto a piece of broken statuary that gave him sight lines on all 3 tunnel mouths. "Optics are degraded but functional. I can still shoot." "Sarah, how long before that predicted warp gale hits?" She checked her auspex. "Readings are unstable. Could be hours. Could be less." Tallow struck his chime once, a test note. The sound rang clear through the sanctum. It would carry down every tunnel and announce our position to anything listening. "Keep it ready but quiet," I said. He nodded. 20 minutes passed. Bran finished placing 5 charges, 1 on each tunnel entrance, 2 on supporting columns. He was wiring them together when Mother Hale emerged from the inner sanctum, her face illuminated by what she carried. It was a reliquary box, small, maybe the size of a ration tin, covered in inscriptions. She held it like it contained the Emperor himself. Pre-heresy documentation, sealed and intact. This proves the cathedral fell to internal corruption, not external assault. This justifies— Time to go, I said. Bran, arm the charges. Not yet, Hale's voice sharpened. There's more inside. I saw data cores, preserved texts. We're leaving now. I am ordering you to hold this position while I— Something shrieked in the eastern tunnel. Close. The sound multiplied as it echoed layer upon layer of voices. Contact imminent, Strack said from his perch. Multiple signatures. They're coming fast. Bran, arm those charges. Yara, how's the ward? Complete, she said. She held up her last ampulla, half empty. This is it. When this runs dry, we have nothing. The creatures poured from the eastern tunnel, pack hunters moving in coordinated waves. Strack fired. One dropped. He fired again. Another fell, but the rest kept coming. Bran, we need those charges now. Timer's not arming. Remote detonator's dead. I can trigger it manually, but someone has to hold the switch. The creatures hit the ward line. They recoiled from Yara's oil markings, circling, testing. Skulkers appeared from the western tunnel, smaller, faster, cutting toward our flanks. Mother Hale still stood in the center of the sanctum, clutching her reliquary. We need 5 more minutes, just 5. We don't have 5 seconds, I said. Everyone out. North tunnel. Move. Bran grabbed the detonator. I'll hold it. Get them out. I miscalculated the blast radius anyway. I stay. You live. Simple geometry. He checked the fuse connection one last time. When you hear the tone, run faster. Mother Hale turned toward the inner sanctum. I'm not leaving without— Then you die here, I said, and we ran. I looked back once and saw Bran crouched by the charges, holding the detonator switch with both hands. Mother Hale stood frozen between him and the inner sanctum, her reliquary clutched to her chest. The tone began, a high whine that meant the charges were live. I pushed my squad into the north tunnel. Behind us, Mother Hale made her choice. She ran toward the inner sanctum. The explosion was pressure before sound. It drove the air from my lungs and threw me forward into Sarah. The tunnel shook, stone cracked, dust and heat rolled over us in a wave. When I could hear again, the sanctum was gone, collapsed. We picked ourselves up slowly. Strack had blood running from his ears, but we were alive. Keep moving, I said, away from the collapse. We stumbled forward through the tunnel. The ground sloped downward. Emergency lighting flared weakly along the walls, ancient systems still powered by failing cells. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber, and I stopped. The ward engine rose before us. Machinery fused with architecture. Columns of brass and stone reaching upward to support a ceiling I couldn't see, and embedded in every surface, fused into the metal, grown into the stone, were human figures. Ossified, fossilized, their mouths open in eternal screaming or singing. The miasma rolled from it in visible waves, thick enough to distort the light. What is that? Sarah whispered. I counted the figures nearest to us. 20, more deeper in. They'd been people once, defenders, workers, maybe even priests. Now they were part of the machine. Strack climbed down from where he'd been checking our rear. His hands were shaking worse than before. When he raised his rifle to scan the chamber, I saw rust spreading across his wrist, where the augmetic interface met flesh. How long do we have? I asked Yara. She looked at the ward engine, at her empty ampullae. Hours, maybe less. This is the source. This is what's been bleeding the warp taint into the whole sector. Can we collapse it? We'd need charges. Lots of them. Placed precisely. She paused. And someone to arm them. I looked at the cathedral machine, at the human figures frozen in its structure, and understood what we'd been sent to find. We'd found it. Now we had to destroy it, or die trying. We moved deeper into the chamber, following a walkway of fused bone and metal that spiraled down toward the engine's core. The ossified figures were everywhere, built into the walls, the floor, the support columns. I looked at one closely as we passed. Its face was still recognizable. Human, male. The uniform fragments fused to its chest showed imperial markings. They were ours. Sierra stopped beside me, her auspex scanning the figure. Life signs, residual, like they're not completely dead. That's not possible. Tell that to the readings. She moved on, but I stayed a moment longer, looking at the face. Whoever he'd been, he'd served the Emperor once. Now he was fuel for something that had broken. Strax stumbled. His rifle clattered against the railing. When I reached him, his right hand was locked in a claw, fingers bent inward. The augmetic interface in his wrist was black with oxidation, and the flesh around it had gone grey. How bad? He tried to flex his hand. Nothing moved. Bad enough. I've got maybe one shot left before my whole arm locks. Can you make it count? He looked ahead, where the walkway opened onto a platform surrounding the engine's central core. Movement in the shadows, pack hunters circling. One rose above the others, larger, its jaw distended in what might have been a scream or a call. Yeah, Strax said. I can make it count. We reached the platform. The ward engine's core throbbed like a buried heart before us, a sphere of brass and stone held in a web of cables and struts, covered in inscriptions. The miasma rolled from it in thick waves. Tallow moved toward the engine, his chime held ready. He struck it once experimentally. The note rang out and the engine's pulse stuttered. Just for a second. Just enough to notice. He turned and signed to me. He was pointing at the chime, then at the engine, then drawing his finger across his throat. You can kill it with sound. He nodded. Then he held up both hands and mimed holding something steady. For a long time. How long? He signed again. I counted the gestures. 10. Maybe more. 10 minutes. He nodded. Behind us, something shrieked. The pack leader. It charged across the platform and Strack raised his rifle. His shot was perfect. Center mass. The creature folded and skidded to a stop 3 meters away. Then Strack's hand seized completely, his fingers locked around the trigger guard. He tried to release the rifle and couldn't. Sergeant, he said quietly. I knew what he was asking before he finished. My arm's gone, spreading to my shoulder. Give it 5 minutes and I'll be feral. He met my eyes. Do it now, while I can still ask. Yara stepped forward. I might be able to— No, Strack said. You can't. We both know it. The pack was closing. More of them emerged from the shadows, moving in coordinated groups. They'd learned patience. They'd learned to wait for weakness. I drew my execution pistol. 2 rounds left. Strack knelt without being told. He checked his rifle bolt one last time, even though he couldn't fire it anymore. Habit to the end. Make it clean, he said. I put the barrel against his temple. I spoke the litany. For the line, for the throne, for those who remain. I pulled the trigger. He fell forward and I caught him, lowering him to the platform. Yara pulled her last tin of promethium paste, but I stopped her. Save it. We need it for the engine. The pack surged forward. Tallow struck his chime, 3 times in rapid succession. The creatures hesitated, but only for a moment. There were too many. The sound couldn't cover every angle. Sarah, how do we collapse this thing? She studied her auspex, then looked at the engine's structure. Shaped charge at the base of the core, but it needs to be armed, manually. Remote detonators won't work through the interference. Bran had 1 charge left in his kit, Ratch said. I saw him stash it before we entered the sanctum. I looked back the way we'd come. The charge would be in the rubble, if it survived. Ratch, go. Get the charge, fast. He ran without argument. He was good at running. Tallow struck his chime again, and this time the pattern was different. Higher. The engine's pulse stuttered, and the ossified figures embedded in the walls began to move. Small twitches, fingers curling, mouths opening wider. The engine groaned, deep, mechanical, like something waking up. What did you do? Yara asked. Tallow signed rapidly. I caught enough to understand. The chime could invert the engine's frequency, disrupt the pattern that kept it stable. If he held the cadence long enough, the core would crack, but it required sustained striking. "How long?" I asked. He held up 10 fingers. 10 minutes of continuous striking while the pack closed in and the engine tried to tear itself apart. Ratch returned. The charge clutched to his chest. "Got it! Fuse is intact!" I took it from him. The charge was compact but powerful, designed to punch through armor plating or structural supports, enough to crack the core if placed correctly. "Sarah, mark the placement point." She studied the engine's base, then pointed to a junction where 3 support struts met. "There, that's the load-bearing point. Charge there and the whole structure collapses." "Radius?" She checked her auspex. "Everything within 200 meters, maybe more. The walkway we came down, that's gone. Anyone inside when it blows doesn't walk out." I looked at Tallow. He was already moving into position, his chime raised. He struck once and the engine shuddered. The ossified figures convulsed. He met my eyes and signed, "I hold, you arm, you run. You'll be inside the collapse radius." He signed again. "I know." The pack was massing at the platform edges. Skulkers appeared from access tunnels I hadn't seen. "Yara, Sarah, Ratch, get to the exit tunnel. When I arm this charge, you run and you don't stop." "What about you?" "I arm it, then I follow." "And Tallow?" I didn't answer. She already knew. Tallow struck his chime. The cadence was hypnotic. High notes cascading into low, building a rhythm that made the engine pulse erratically. The ossified figures thrashed. One of them tore free from the wall, collapsing to the floor in a heap of bone and corroded metal. "Go," I said. They went. Yara first, then Sarah, then Ratch. I watched them reach the tunnel and disappear. I moved to the placement point with the charge. The fuse was manual, a simple pressure switch that required constant contact. I set it against the support strut junction and checked the positioning. Tallow kept striking. His wrists were already red, the skin breaking. But he didn't stop. I armed the charge. The tone began, the same high whine Brand's charges had made. 10 seconds to detonation once I released the switch. I looked at Tallow. He looked back. He struck the chime one more time, and the engine screamed. 10 seconds, I said. "When I let go, you have 10 seconds. Then this whole place comes down." He nodded. He understood. He struck the chime again. I released the switch and ran. The tone climbed higher. I ran up the walkway, boots hammering metal. Behind me, Tallow's chime kept ringing, perfect cadence, never faltering. The engine screamed. The sound was layered, dozens of voices overlapping, maybe the ossified figures finally finding their throats again. Something grabbed my ankle. A skulker had emerged from beneath the walkway grating. Its mandibles clamped down, cutting through fabric and flesh. I kicked it off and kept running. Blood ran down into my boot. The pack poured onto the walkway ahead. They'd circled around, cutting off my exit. I fired my execution pistol, 1 round left now, and dropped the first creature. The others hesitated just long enough. I reached the tunnel entrance. Sarah was there, rifle raised, firing past me at the pack. I dove into the tunnel. Sarah turned and ran beside me. Ahead I saw Yara and Ratch, their silhouettes against emergency lighting. The explosion was light before sound. White hot, blinding. Then pressure that lifted me off my feet and threw me forward. I hit stone and rolled, covering my head as the tunnel came apart. The roar went on forever, rock splitting, metal tearing, the engine's death scream cutting through everything else until it didn't. I lay there, breathing dust, and counted to 10, then 20, making sure my lungs still worked, making sure I was still alive. I stood slowly. My ears rang. Blood ran down the side of my face from somewhere. The tunnel behind me had collapsed completely, tons of rubble sealing it shut. Tallow was under there. The engine was under there. Everything. "Sarah?" I called. No answer. I moved forward, climbing over rubble. The tunnel had fractured. Cracks ran through the walls and ceiling. In places, the floor had dropped away entirely. I found Sarah 30 meters ahead. A support beam had come down across her back. She was still breathing, but barely. Blood pooled beneath her. "Sergeant!" she whispered. Her auspex lay beside her, screen shattered. I knelt. "I'm here. Did it work? The engine?" "It's gone. You did good." She smiled slightly. Then she stopped breathing. I checked for a pulse and found nothing. I closed her eyes and kept moving. The tunnel split ahead. I followed the main branch, the one that should lead toward the surface. Emergency lighting gave way to darkness. I pulled a glow stick from my belt and cracked it. Chemical light, green and cold. I found Yara at the next junction. She sat with her back against the wall, her ampulla bandolier empty, her hands covered in oil. She'd tried to draw ward lines. She'd run out halfway through. The skulkers had found her anyway. I didn't stop to check if she was dead. I could tell from the way she sat, too still, too quiet, head tilted at an angle that living people don't manage. I walked past her toward the surface. The tunnel climbed. My ankle throbbed where the skulker had torn it. The darkness ahead became grey, then lighter grey. Then I saw sky. I emerged onto the surface at what must have been dawn, though the light didn't change the way dawn should. The sky was the same ash-heavy haze it had been when we descended. The ruin belt stretched in every direction, bone columns and collapsed structures under a sun that didn't seem to exist. I looked back at the tunnel entrance. Smoke rose from somewhere deep inside. The ground had settled. Whatever the ward engine had been, it was buried now, collapsed. I checked my execution pistol. Empty. I'd fired the last round at the pack. 20 meters away, I saw the ward line. Yara had drawn it before we descended, one final perimeter marking safe ground from tainted. The oil still glowed, barely visible in the grey light, a residual pulse from a system that fed on faith until it broke. I started walking toward it. No extraction coordinates, no Vox signal, no squad. Just me, the rubble, and a sky that refused to brighten. I tried to speak a litany, the one I'd used for Harren, for Strack, for all of them. For the line, for the throne, for those who remain. The words stuck in my throat. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I'd spoken them too many times. They'd worn through, used up, empty as my pistol. I reached the ward line and stopped. The oil glowed under my boot. Last proof that Yara had been here, that any of us had been here. I stepped over it. Ahead was silence, ash and ruins that went on farther than I could see. I walked into it without prayer, without purpose, without anyone left to lead. Somewhere in the rubble, the wind moved through empty structures. It might have been the warp gale finally arriving. It might have been nothing. I didn't look back to check. I just walked. The Emperor's light here was a rumor. And rumors die like everything else.